Good evening, and welcome to the second public forum on the topic of regionalization of our K-12 schools. I'd like to start by thanking Amherst Media for hosting us this evening and for filming us so that this will be available to the community of Amherst over the next several weeks. I'm Catherine Oppie. I'm chair of the Amherst School Committee and a member of the Regional School District Planning Committee. With me tonight are other members of the Regional District School Planning Committee, Alyssa Brewer, who is also a member of the Select Board, and Andy Steinberg, who is the chair of the Finance Committee. We are also pleased to have our guest speaker, Mr. Stephen Hemman, from the Massachusetts Regional School District, Massachusetts Association of Regional School Districts, who will be making a presentation about regionalization and will work to answer some of the questions that were raised at our last public forum in April and any that may emerge this evening. I'd like to begin tonight by briefly telling you about our committee, where we've been and where we're going. As many of you may already know, our committee was formed by a vote in town meeting last November. The purpose of the committee, as charged by town meeting, is to perform a detailed exploration of and recommendation as to forming a regional school district in our K through 6 schools. In recent years, the idea of enlarging school regions has gained national attention. A major driver of this conversation is the argument that regionalization can foster greater curricular alignment, streamline administration, and eliminate inefficiencies and redundancies. A case has been made that regionalization can cut costs in things like transportation and special education, and that its implementation may, at least temporarily, bring in more state money in support of the process. The town moderator appointed Alyssa, Andy, and myself to look at these issues. The other towns in our secondary region, Leverett, Shutesbury, and Pelham, also formed regional school district planning committees. Over the last 6 months, we've held 10 public meetings and 1 other public forum. At that public forum, we gathered some of the questions that we hope Mr. Hemman will be able to answer this evening. We have also met informally with our counterparts in the other 3 towns to hear outside speakers, including Mr. Hemman. The questions raised in April will help us as we begin to work more closely with the other committees. Tomorrow morning at a public meeting of this committee, we will vote to decide whether to join with the other 3 regional school district planning committees to form a regional board. Next week, we will meet with the other committees to vote together to form this board. Our Amherst-specific questions and concerns will guide us as we continue through this process of examining the costs and benefits to Amherst of a K through 6 region. So now I would like to again welcome Mr. Stephen Hemman. Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice to be here this evening. I said my name is Stephen Hemman. I'm the Executive Director for the Massachusetts Association of Regional Schools. I am a retired school superintendent. I was at Narragansett Regional School District, which is the towns of Temple and Phillipston, from 2000 to 2008. Before that, I was an assistant superintendent in Norwood, as well as business manager, and before that, I was an assistant principal in Vermont, and also I taught school for 10 years. I hold a bachelor's degree from Florida Southern College, a master's in education from Boston University, an MBA from the University of Vermont, and a doctorate in education, leadership, and schooling from University of Massachusetts at Lowell. This evening I've been asked to come and talk about the process, and that's how do you go about regionalization. And it's defined by law, and I'll go through that with you in a step-by-step process, what you need to do, and to find out if regionalization is what you really want to do, and make sure everyone is comfortable as they do it. One thing I always want to say is remembering what we're doing in education is what's best for children so that they can have the best possible education for the rest of their lives. So tonight, let's begin with the first part of it. The agenda will be who is MARS. I'll tell you a little bit about us. Forming a regional school district, the process. State laws and DESE regulations. And DESE stands for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We'll talk about the step-by-step process, the timeline, that you need to. First of all, let's take a look at Mars. We're a regional school organization. We have 78 members, of which Amherst Pelham Regional School District is a member. We are very concerned in regional transportation, and I would report that the the legislature is going to increase it, so our percentage will be higher. We propose certain laws, and we also propose regulations that will benefit or help streamline regional school districts. We have general meetings once a month where we present timely topics, invite all members to come. We do a professional development with new superintendents, business manager, and school committee. And we have written the step-by-step for forming a regional school district. And what I would just point out that this book here that we produced here for regionalization never existed. And so fortunately, you're going to have something to follow if you wanted to go through the regionalization process. And also, we're involved in strategic planning, working with districts how they can strategically plan for the future. So forming a regional school district. There are state laws. It's under Chapter 71. Also, there are regulations from the Department of Education that you have to look at. So all of those two parts are the guiding forces when you're going to decide to regionalize. So the first thing is your chairman said, indication that the state laws is Chapter 71, Section 14, and the district planning committees of 2 or more towns form a district planning board. And the committees are appointed as indicated by the town moderators in each of the towns. Hopefully, actions will have been taken to form this district plan consisting of Amherst, Pelham, Shutesbury, and Leverett after this program has been broadcast. Now, the Regional Planning Board, what's their job? What are they supposed to do? It shall be the duty of the Regional Planning Board to study the fiscal and educational advisability of establishing a regional school district, its organization, operation, and control, all aspects of forming the region, and also concerned with constructing, maintaining, and operating schools to serve the needs of the district. What's the operation going to look like? Now, there are incentives to regionalize, and they were formally stated to you a little bit. Incentives are 3 categories: educational incentives, and that should be the first incentive. What are you going to be able to do better for the children of your towns? The next is fiscal, and the third can be building incentives. I would just tell you, I'm mentioning that I worked last year with Somerset Berkeley. They formed a new secondary regional school district, and there was to have a new high school. And so when they formed the region, School Building Authority said, we'll bring you into the program. And I can tell you they did regionalize and overwhelming votes, and they're now going to get an $80 million new high school, and at the rate of approximately like 67 to 68% reimbursement. Now, incentives to regionalize come different ways. One is a single school committee with a cohesive educational policy, a single administration with potential for more efficient economical operation of school departments, a coordinated curriculum kindergarten through grade 12, and you take a look at how you're organized now, single salary schedule, single teacher unit for negotiations, a single budget administered to take advantage of efficient centralized purchasing techniques, savings incurred by bulk purchasing combined transportation costs, reduction of duplicate effort in the administration of the program, business, procedures, and negotiations, utilization of sound long-range planning and fuller utilization of teachers in all school facilities for all pupils affected. In the region, you can move people around. You can have part-time people that become like 0.5 in one district, 0.25 in another district. They're full-time, but yet you can use them effectively between your schools. And if you're a small district, it gets difficult to employ, especially like art, music, PE people, full-time people, difficult to improve them, so you can get better utilization of your staff. An opportunity for more programs and more enrichment within school curriculum. Coordinated program of testing, guidance, health services, school adjustment work. And state transportation reimbursement. If you're regionalized, you can receive regional transportation reimbursement, which we hope to be close to 60% coming for next year. Now, there are challenges to regionalization. One of the things is that you take a look at educational and social differences, local control and community decisiveness, and also resistance to any change and a lot of misconceptions about regionalization. And part of those are the challenges that you have to work at to tell people. And we urge people to establish a community relations program through the media so that people know exactly what's happening every step of the way. And there's financial challenges. You have to take a look very carefully. What is the outcome? What's going to be the financial aspect? Because that's one of the first things they ask. But we urge and take a look at what's the educational value. Now, the step-by-step, as I indicated to you, that we developed a step-by-step for regionalization under a contract with the Department of Education, and this is free to every district that would like to have it. The process is designed for 2 or more towns joining to form a regional school district or a region expanding. And I would just want to point out right now, Air Shirley formed a regional school district, Somerset Berkeley Secondary, Harwich Chatham out on the Cape, and Southwick, Tolland, Granville became a fully K-12 district recently. Also, up in North Adams, there is an expansion of towns joining that vocational region. So there's quite a bit of activities taking place. So what we've developed is the we call Phase 1. And Phase 1 is to regionalize. Phase 2 is then all the operational aspects that you have to do once you regionalize to come together. And what you take a look at is, for your case, is you're developing a Model 1 here, 2 or more towns forming a district. But you're also, like in a Model 4, that you have a secondary region, and you would have an elementary region within that. So also a supervisory union within that. So you take a look at what the model is, because you have to define what you're going to be in your regional agreement. We also have developed is the pathway, so people could follow that. And what you've been doing right now is you've been dealing primarily with your preliminary discussions. You're going to form your planning committees and your planning board. Then you start the process. And one of the things that we strongly urge is develop a communications plan to make sure everybody knows what's going on. You hold focus groups, which you've been doing, and then you determine if you're going to regionalize or not. And if you are, then you develop your agreement. You have to be working very closely with the Department of Education on your draft agreement because there are requirements that you meet there to be approved. The Department of Education has to approve it. The commissioner has to approve the agreement. Then the voter, you go to town meetings, and each town has to vote to join, and then finally the new district would come into play. Now, we also have developed each of these boxes and each of those squares you saw up top, each of the steps that have to happen. I won't go into much detail with it, but it's in the book and it tells you exactly what you need to do and how do you accomplish your task. I can tell you that I worked 2 years ago with Somerset Berkeley. This did not exist, and I worked with them as an unpaid consultant working with them, and out of that we felt that we needed to do this, and it's been very, I think, successful for people to use. What's your time frame? The first thing is that, if you're going to regionalize, you have to tell the Department of Education by December 1st that in order for the new member to be included in the Chapter 70 for the next July 1. So they have to be told by December 1st you're going to have a new region by July 1. Now, in your particular case, the timeline is at least 1 year and maybe 2 years. What it takes, the Somerset Berkeley, it was a 1-year process by which they just formed the committees in June, and then the following June they had their votes at town meeting, and then they had a 1 year to bring all the aspects they had to do to form the new region. All towns must vote in the affirmative to form a regional school district, and I would say once the district planning board produces the agreement, it goes to the towns, it can't be changed. It's an up or down vote. And if it gets voted down, and however there's different ways of writing it, you can have it that if a town votes no, the other 3 towns still can form a district if they so choose to. But again, once it goes to town meeting, it's an up or down vote. After a transition period of several months to a year, a new region can become operational. And there's a lot of things you have to do for the region to become operational. Now, the planning board process, one of the things is we suggest in our thing is that they hire a consultant to guide the work of the planning board, give the assistance. Most of the people on your board are working full-time or have jobs, and it's difficult for them, but to get people to do that. You would put out under Chapter 30B requesting a consultant to work with you on that. You'd also hire a financial consultant to prepare the financial data and reports, and that's you got to be very careful how you're calculating it and have people know what they're doing. And finally, you have hire legal counsel, the board so chooses, to work with you on the agreement, and then also that counsel works with the other town councils to make sure everybody's in agreement on that. Also, at the same time, anytime you're on the agreement as you're working, it goes into the department. Christine Lynch, who works with the regions, reviews it, and then it goes over to legal to be reviewed. The concept is that by the time the board votes, here's our agreement, that they know that if the towns pass it, it would be accepted by the board, by the Commissioner of Education. You study the fiscal and educational advisability of establishing a regional school district, determine the region's organization, operation, control, examine the construction, maintenance, and operation of the schools to meet the needs of the district, develop a long-range educational structural plan. These are requirements that you have to do. And then you request reorganization needs conference with the department, elementary, and you periodically meet with them, and they can give you valuable assistance to do that. And finally, the district planning board is required to resubmit a finding recommendation to the selectmen of each of the towns. Now, the consultants that we talked about using the step-by-step process, developed agendas, worked with development of the regional agreement, using the model agreement. And that's the one good thing that we developed, I think, out of here is that we did develop a model regional agreement. So you don't have to create one. Here's the model, and then you can do what you want to, how you want to, the different parts of that. And you also, the consultant works keeping contact with the Department of Education. Financial gathers the financial data on each town, develops the assessment methodology, and then compares the cost before regionalization and after. You'll always get what it's going to cost, what's it costing me now, what's it going to cost me in the future. And legal counsel works with the planning to come to a new agreement, and also confers, as I indicated, with the town councils on the other agreements to make sure everyone's in agreement with that. Take care of any also legal other requirements that have to be required to be done. Now, final comments for forming a region is what you'd be doing from now is you organize your planning board, keep towns informed using the meter. This is one of the most important things I could tell you is that having a community relations plan so everybody knows what's going on. Once you come up with say an agreement, you'd want to go out to the towns, all the towns, and when I was working with Somerset Berkeley, we went out during the day to the senior citizen centers, we at night to schools and other organizations, and they found some things that were concerned. So they went back, fixed those up, then they went out again to make sure. It's all in the communications. And I can tell you every vote that was taken was overwhelming because people knew what was going on, what was the purpose, and what was the end result that was going to happen. You set up meetings, focus groups within your towns, and you study all aspects of the regionalization so everybody would feel comfortable. And keep in mind the goal is to provide the best possible education for children of your town. Now, there were some questions, and I just want to respond to the answers. School committee governance. Under one person, one vote law provides several ways to have school committee members chosen, but there's constitutional law that you have to be one person, one vote. There are several ways to be in compliance, and it has to happen. And in order for agreement to be approved, the department will look very carefully at that to make sure that you're in compliance. The organization of a school district, I have to tell you, is complex and many requirements, and someone had talked about principals. I can tell you the principals need to concentrate on students and teachers, and also there's new laws coming down that principals are going to have to deal with, especially teacher observations, evaluations. They need to be in the schools, and that's why you have a central office and superintendent to operate what you need in order to provide the services and materials that the schools need. Town schools can be owned by the town and leased to the region. Towns can pay for renovations. What happened where I was at Narragansett, and I'm giving you examples, towns of Temple and Phillipston, they owned the two towns, the region owned the middle and high school, which is one complex. The elementary schools were owned by the towns, and then there was a lease because the law requires that the region would have control of day-to-day operations. There can be arrangements made that at certain costs. In that case, what we had at Narragansett was under $5,000 was the region. Any expenses over $5,000 was responsibility of the town, but they were owned by the town. Other regions, they can be owned, all of them can be owned. It depends where you are. A lot of it depended, history of that, when the towns owned it, they kept ownership, and then they moved on the secondary level owned by the region. In a region agreement, there can be language that states the process for closing schools. Sometimes in regions are formed, they're concerned about is an elementary school going to be closed. I worked as a consultant with Paul Deladucci and I with Southwick, Tall, and Granville. And we wrote into that agreement, working with them, that there had to be a whole year process if there was going to be a school closing. For whatever reason, declining enrollments or whatever, it's just going to be willy-nilly done. They had to come up with a process and say, why would it close? What's going to be the advantages? What's going to happen? So that can happen when you're going to do it. So you can write the agreement language in that. The only thing you'd want to be careful that you don't write language into an agreement that makes it really impossible. You need to look 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years down the road of what's it going to be like in our community, so you don't put people in a process that is very difficult. The assessment is done by the statutory method, but the regional agreement can have an alternative assessment process provided that all towns agree to it each year. And this is statutory required. That's a whole other game I'd have to talk to you about, but this is a law that requires that. But you can have an alternate assessment as long as it's a fair and equitable process, and that the department then would agree to it. Currently, students in the elementary districts organized, you have by 2 different central offices and 4 school committees. I believe I'm correct. As a region, there would be 1 central office and 1 school committee. So it's a better operation, which we talked about earlier. And questions that have been raised would be discussed and solved by the district planning board. That's why you form the board, and then they start. And the reason they set the law, because your 3 people here are sitting down, and they've been appointed, legally been appointed, and can sit there. If they didn't, someone would say, who gave you the right to sit and talk about our town? Well, the town meeting has voted to create the board, the planning committee, and then they can vote to form the board. And that's when a lot of the answers will come out. And again, is going through the process of a community relations plan. So that, I think, would be the what I would conclude my presentation to you on the process that you'd go through. I would summarize is that very fortunately you could have a process that can tell you what to do, the steps. You have people looking for consultants. You have the Department of Education. You have your own town council, so they can go through and everybody can get the answers that they need to know. And what's it going to benefit? The question I always will say: how will it benefit the children? And I always say, children don't vote; the adults vote. So what are you going to do for your children for that one? But also, realistically, there's a financial constraint you have to take care of. What can you do within your communities? But I think if everybody working together, that you can come out with a very good educational system. So that would conclude my presentation at this point. And I turn it over to Andy.
Okay. Well, thank you. We're going to very quickly move towards a part of this program where we want to make sure that you have an opportunity, if you're in the audience this evening, if you have any questions that you want to pose to Mr. Hemman, to be able to do so. We did, as you may realize, take the flip charts that we produced at our last forum and provided them to Mr. Hemman to help prepare for this evening. And I think that the one thing that was obvious to us in following up on those discussions that we had with him is that some of the things that were asked have quick answers, but a lot of them really require this process. And that was what became obvious as we looked into it and kept the discussion going. And I think that the presentation about the depth of the process and the length of the process reemphasizes that, and the consultants that we will be hiring, such as the educational consultant, will be able to help us address some of the questions that were very thoughtfully posed at the last forum on questions like the unique needs of many of the children from Amherst, and how we can make sure that those unique needs will continue to be met in the future if this change were to take place. So I don't know if you have any follow-up to that, Steve? Or?
Well, one of the things you want to take a look at is in the process, and I do need to make clearly so everybody clearly understands. I'm here today, presentation to you, asked to because Amherst Pelham is a member association. We also do consulting work, and we work with districts to do that. You have to go through a Chapter 30B process to put it out, and anybody can respond to your request for assistance, however you do that. So we do that, and we would work with you if you so choose to, but it's a legal process that you go through. So I want to make sure everybody clearly understands that. I'm here tonight as the executive director, giving you what the process is so that you know. There will be a lot of questions, a lot of misconceptions, a lot of worrying. People think they lose local control. You do not lose local control in that the end result, when the school committee, say you form your new K-6 region, and the school committee does a budget, they do their assessment to you, each town has to vote that assessment. And of the 4 towns, you have to have 3 out of the 4 have to vote in favor. So all 4 towns have an equal vote, whether that budget will be passed or not. There comes questions about large communities, small communities. How do you work those through? And I think when communities sit down and work together and they can see that it benefits everybody, then it's a better situation for the children. So, I mean, again, it's letting people talk, letting them see what's going on, take a look at all the misconceptions. I mean, one of the misconceptions we get that immediately Regionalize, you're going to close schools. That's not necessarily the case. You have to make those decisions. If you have a declining enrollments, and you have to take a look at what's the best way to do it. And if you're going to have 27 kids in an elementary school, K-6, can you really keep 27 kids going? I'm using that as an extreme point, but the thing is you got to take a look at what's going to be the best way to do that. And again, I will tell you, if you take a look right now, the enrollments are going down. To take a look, especially the elementary level, so you need to take a look at what's going to be the best way to do that and use your dollars most efficiently.
Melissa or Catherine, do you have any follow-up questions at this point?
Well, you know, actually, this issue of declining enrollments in elementary school that you just mentioned, one of the things that I've thought about in the committees, or talked about a little bit, and I guess you've talked about, is this idea of the advantage of regionalization around that issue in terms of flexibility. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, one of the things that can happen is, do you have enough children? You want to make sure children have, besides the regular classroom, the art, music, PE, and say maybe some gifted and talented programs. If you're a small district, you only got like 125 kids in a class, it's difficult to afford that. So that you could share a person to go to the different schools, so they could have at least 1 or 2 days of art, 1 or 2 days of music and PE. But you can share. You can't afford to have a full-time PE person in your building, but you could afford to have a 0.5, so that you still have the programs that they need to have. Also, one of the things that you can share is that with special education. And one of the things that we were able to do is that we were able to create programs in our region to bring kids, instead of out of district placements, we created the programs within our district. We had enough children that needed a particular type of program. So it makes it a lot easier in a region, the 4 towns together, if you wanted to create those types of programs that an individual town couldn't afford to do. There are just lots of things to do with that. There is a change in the governance. So obviously, you don't have your own school committee, but yet those people are on the region and will have votes to decide what they want to see happening. But again, if you take a look right now, everyone's talking about the economy. Well, they're concerned about how many funds you're going to have. So you got to use every dollar most efficiently and effectively. We look at all options that you can use to make sure that the dollars are being spent wisely. And again, is you take a look at the operation. Part of this study, what you do is to take a look at what is your administrative operation, where are the kids going, kids are all winded, what programs are they under, the curriculum. So you would like all the kids that you start at your elementary, when they go up to the middle and to the high school, they're all on the same playing field, the level field. They all have the same backgrounds, and they all have the coursework that they've had, so they're prepared to be successful.
Thank you. I have one more question, because there was a report this afternoon about this forum tonight on one of the news stations, and it said that somebody had interviewed some of the parents in Amherst, and one of the concerns was that regionalization would bring about overcrowded classrooms.
Well, I don't know why they would say that, because the school committee of the region will make the decision where they're going to put children, and they'll be in control of that. And in many cases, you might wind up that it'd be a better situation. Now, I'll give you an example that I had faced is in Templeton. They went to their schools, and Phillipston went to the K-6, K-5 to their schools. In one year, we had kindergarten kids in Templeton. We had 45 kids, and I had only one teacher. On one side of town, there were like 12 kids, and we were able to have them for that year go over to Phillipston, which had space. That was a one-year term, and the parents agreed. The parents turned out that was a great thing, because now they were in classes of 1 to 20 instead of 1 to 45. So they were very happy with that. So it gives you flexibility to do that. But we worked with the parents, and everybody agreed this is going to be the best thing to do. So that was part of it. So it gives you some flexibility to what you need to do, and also where children can do better. We had a situation where a child was not doing very well at an elementary one school, and we moved him to the other school, and he wound up being very successful. So different environments where the children go. And that was what the parents wanted that, and we had the flexibility to do that. It didn't cost us any extra money, and we were able to make those decisions. So it gives you flexibility to do what you need to do concerning with kids. Now, those are examples that I did. I'm not, again, you have to take a look. Every year is different. I got news for you. As you come across every year with kids and parents and everything else is different. And so you want to have as much by region. When I was the two-town region, I had a lot of flexibility to do what I needed to do for kids, as well as staff. And we could have staff going. We had our art teacher went from every single building. but every single kid had at least art 2 days a week. So we're very pleased, in gym 2 days a week. And if they had been separate towns, they wouldn't have been able to do that.
Thank you.
Melissa?
Yeah, if I could follow up on that, one of the things that we're very fortunate here in Amherst and in the other towns in the region is that we aren't yet, and hope to not be, hope we're coming back up out of the economy, associated with, you had said that there would be towns that wouldn't have had art and wouldn't have had, well, that's not a problem for us. We would like there to be more, perhaps, but we're not in the situation where there simply wouldn't be any. So that level of incentive is a little different here, because it might be that we could do more, but it wouldn't be that they wouldn't have it at all. So that's one of the things that we just bring to the table that's a little different than perhaps another community is. I do have some specific questions that maybe you can just, again, just based on your experiences with these different communities, because you listed off a bunch of them, is since the region owns the middle school and high school, currently the towns don't own it, why is it that the model, you mentioned, I believe, that the towns would still own the elementary schools? Why wouldn't the region own the elementary schools?
At that point, that's what they just locally decided. They wanted to keep their ownership.
Okay, so it's a choice that would need to be
Absolutely a
made.
choice.
Okay, that's an important
And also,
thing to
it
know.
also became a financial issue that you'd have to put money to buy the buildings and everything else, and they chose not to. A lot of times, if the new region comes in and they build the elementary school, then they'll own it. But these were existing schools, and they just said they continue to own them.
Okay.
In fact, they wanted to own them because then they felt they had some control over the physical plan.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you. That was important to understand. And then, do you have any examples, again, based on your experience beyond the whole vote, some specific examples of how the one person, one vote issue plays out? Like, that's what's been a concern here. For example, obviously we currently have a regional committee that has 5 Amherst members, 2 Pelham members, 1 Leverett, 1 Shutesbury. Both in terms of how big do you find, based on your experiences, a committee can be, and how do you apportion them?
Well, there is Chapter 71, section, I can't remember the exact section number, designates the legal ways that you can meet the one person, one vote. Now, you need to go back, probably in the 60s is when there were cases brought to the courts and wound up to the Supreme Court that it's the one person, one vote. And what that may happen was legislators, actually congressional districts, usually about 500,000. In some districts were maybe 300, and some were 600, so they weren't having equality. So the Supreme Court ruled, and then that you have to have equality. Now, you take a look at right now, every 10 years, based on the federal census, you have to reapportion the senators and reps in the state, how many they're going to have, so there's equal numbers. So every senator is representing an equal number of people, and so is a representative. And Congress does the same thing. In fact, Massachusetts lost a congressman because of that. So the same thing applies to the school committee. So you have to have one person, one vote, and there's about 6 or 7 ways that you can be in compliance, and that's one of the things in the regional agreement that the department will look at to do that. I'd gladly at another time go over those things. That takes a whole other process to go over that and to talk about what to be in compliance with that. I can just tell you where I was, as a matter of public record, Templeton, Phillipston. Templeton was approximately 7,500 to 8,000, and Phillipston was maybe 1,800 to 2,000. So they decided that they wanted to have 5 from Templeton and 3 from Phillipston. If you looked at it on a proportional basis, it didn't match. But one of the laws says that you can have a residency requirement, but you run across from both towns. So when a person runs for Templeton, they run in Templeton and they run in Phillipston, though they're a Templeton residents, 5, and the Phillipston does the same thing. And a number of districts do that. They go cross lines, because if there's a big discrepancy in towns, then they're in compliance, because the whole district is voting for them. They are being represented by, that person on the committee is represented by all of the people in the district. Other ways is that a lot of vocational schools do it, that the Board of Selectmen or the school committee involved appoint them. If they're appointed, then they are not, then you can compliance. But I'd go through that with you if you want, all the steps that are involved with that.
Thank you.
Anything else, Melissa?
Nope.
Okay, I guess unless somebody else from the committee has something to ask, we wanted to reserve some time for other people who are here with us now to be able to ask any questions that they might have. And
my name is Lawrence O'Brien. I'm a member of the school committee and a resident of Amherst. And I'm a teacher as well, and I'm active in my union. And so I'm kind of curious, if the regionalization planning is going on, is there a parallel process going on with all of the various union locals? And how does that usually work? Because I could imagine this would be a really interesting situation because you have 4 different locals at the elementary level, and 2 are used to working and negotiating with within a different regional agreement.
Right. The answer is yes, you have to go through a parallel as you're going through the process. Good way of doing it is that you bring in the unions and you talk with them. And that's where your fiscal consultant comes in, because you have to compare the salary schedules where people are and what the cost factors would be, that and everything, doing all the processes to go through that. And you bring them into sit down with them and work with them and show them. And sometimes you bring them in and ask them to, as you have your district planning committees, planning board, please attend, because they're open public meetings and we want to work it through. The law says there's laws that describe what happens to teaching positions about that, so that's very clearly defined, that they become employees of the region that's in there, so you have to follow a set procedure on that. So it was successful. Where we worked out in another district out in the western part of the state, that it was worked with them, and the superintendent and school committee came and talked to the union people and worked with them. So the answer is yes. You got to work with everybody.
I just want to ask just a quick follow-up. Could you give me any references regarding successor clauses, or is there issues of successor clauses? You know, in the private sector, when a company is taken over by another company, there's some, there's federal law that governs successor clauses about continuation
if
of
you're
contracts.
if you're talking, number one is in the case of teacher and retirement issues. Is that one of them?
Well, there's that. There's also various provisions, articles in a contract. You know, when you have unevenness, inevitably there's going to be some similarities, and then there's going to be some unevenness.
Chapter 150E says it becomes negotiable. You have to sit down and negotiate with all the parties involved to come up with. You're going to come up with a new contract. You have to sit down.
Thank you very
But
much.
I would also add, so people will know, if you're a teacher, you're in teacher retirement, so it doesn't matter. You're not local. Right. The local retirement, then usually if you're a local retirement, then you have to work out at a point in time where the region assumes responsibility for their payment and the town's reform for prior people. There's also health insurance, so there's a whole lot that you have to do.
Thank you.
Yep.
Are there other questions, Mr. Hemman?
Hi, Mike Jakes. I had just one question. You had talked about, misconceptions to regionalization. Can you tell us what some of the more significant ones are, or common ones that come up?
Well, the common one is that they're going to close our school. The next one is that our kids are going to have to go to another school and be an hour on the bus, or an hour and a half on the bus. The other becomes we're going to fire all the teachers. People going to get fired and all that. That's not the case. I mean, you work all those through with that. Those are a lot of the big ones. And then we lose total control. Well, control becomes in a different format. But again, you don't lose control. You still have the vote. You're still going to town meeting to vote, but for the assessment, you're going to have representation on the school committee making votes. I know right now we're dealing with a couple towns that are looking to expand a vocational region, and they want to expand because they're sending kids there on a tuition basis, and they want a seat at the table to be on the school committee to have some say. And that's what they want to have. And so that when you're on a tuition basis, the town here's what it costs you, and there's no local governance issue. So they wanted to have a say. So that's where they wanted to go. Again, that's a positive one. But again, there's some of the others. Those are the things I just say. And there's a lot of other people get concerned about what's going to happen, and my child's going to go to this other school or whatever. You have to take a look at it. Sometimes look, what's the situation? Every situation in the state is different, I can tell you.
You're going to hand the microphone to Mary Lou.
Where would I find a list of the schools that are regionalizing and the towns that they're from?
When you say regionalizing, meaning or your list of regions?
The list of school districts that have formed regions recently.
Well, recently I can give you the list of the regions. It's in the Department of Education website. But I can tell you recently, Air Shirley just formed a region. 10 years ago, Manchester, Essex did. Last year, Chatham, Harwich did down in the Cape. Now, those two are K-12s. Somerset Berkeley formed in 9-12. Berkeley had been tuitioning to Somerset for 25 years, and they found they wanted to regionalize, and they got a new building. The next one that is Southwick-Tolland was a K-12, and Granville tuitioned their kids, they're 9-12, but they have their own K-8. They were fully regionalized with Southwick-Tolland, so it's Southwick-Tolland-Granville Regional School District. And then right now up in the vocational school districts are looking to expand by 2 towns joining the district. So those are what's happening at the moment. Cheshire and Lanesborough, I believe. So they're looking to join, and we're working with them on that process. So it's happening.
Okay. Again, additional questions for Mr. Hemman.
Yes, I have Vince O'Connor. So I have articulated some questions at the last meeting that really were political questions that I don't think are really you're here to answer, about the Amherst district, elementary district being about 50% Black, Latino, and Asian at the elementary level, and that being far from the case in the outlying 3 towns. But I have a couple of questions about the issues that you talked about, the role of principals and governance. One, I know there's a concern at the state level for the costs that are being incurred by small towns to pay for superintendents' services. And it's not clear to me why it is that if you have a single town school, an elementary school, why the principal, especially a school that has as the surrounding towns, the 3 outside towns outside of Amherst, all have schools that essentially have one class per grade, and sometimes combined classes. Why it is that a principal could not act as a superintendent for those schools and thereby save the towns the cost of supporting a superintendent's office. So that's the first question.
Well, let me take one question at a time here.
Want to answer that? And then
I'm getting a little older, so you got to keep one thing at a time here. The answer is right now, first of all, is in a school district, and I said it's a complex, in a school district, town, whatever, you have to have all the infrastructure. One is you have to deal with the operation. You have a school committee, and the school committee, you have to have someone working with them. The law currently says you have to have a superintendent. Every school committee district has a superintendent. So you'd have to have a principal that was had a principal's license and a superintendent's license to be legal. Number one. Number two is all of the things that have to happen on the infrastructure to run a school, whether it's 100 kids or 500 kids. You have to deal with, number one, is you have to deal with your budget and your buying materials. You have to have a accounting system in place. You have to have a payroll system in place. You have to, Chapter 30B, if you're going to buy stuff, you got to go out and put the bids together that you have to do. You got transportation, who's going to run the transportation system that they're going to do. You have to also report to the state. You have an end-of-year report, which is extensive. I've done that. You've got EPIMS, which is on the employees. You've got SIMS, which is to deal with students. All that stuff. You've got to have in place is the computer systems. Everything now from the state is coming by way of computers, digitally, everything. So you have to have people don't spend time in doing that. Where do you want your principal to spend his or her time? On all of those things there, or with the students and the teachers. The next thing coming down the pike from on the state is saying there is now they're going to have, and the gentleman here will know this, they're going to have the whole observation evaluation system has changed. And the amount of time that a principal is going to have to spend with those teachers. And it's going to be required to. It's going to be in the contracts, what they need to do. Also negotiating contracts. It is a very difficult situation to put a principal in to sit there and negotiate, and then the next day say to teachers, gee, will you do this or that? It's a very difficult situation where superintendents are a little bit more removed from the day-to-day operation of school, and that's working with the school committee to negotiate it. It is just so much to do that you're taking away. The principal's primary job is to be with the teachers, the kids, and working with parents in a school environment, not being pulled in his or her office and doing all those other things that that are required. There is no choice. You have to do them.
So,
I don't want to get in a debate with you. I just
I mean, obviously, though, there's a difference between an urban school that has 4 classes per grade, where the principal has sometimes 30 to 40 teachers to deal with, and a rural school, elementary school that has at most maybe 8 to 12.
But let me just make sure, I don't mean to interrupt you, but everything I described has to be done whether you have 100 kids or 500 kids.
Oh, I understand that.
All of that stuff has to be done. You have to have
understand.
everything in place, and where do you want, and the bottom line is where do you want them to spend their time?
Right.
And again is, how effective and efficiently they're going to operate.
Yeah, but a principal who has, the principal who has only 8 to 12 teachers to supervise and evaluate may be in a better position to perform those other duties and may actually have time to perform those other duties.
Well, I'm gonna
as opposed to someone who's got.
I'm going to politely
30 to
disagree
40.
because if you heard I don't know if you heard my introduction. I started as a teacher. I went in became a vice principal. I was a business administrator, and then I got my doctorate in education leadership and licensure. I can tell you that I'm probably one of the few superintendents in the state that has an MBA on the business side and other things, and have the educational side. And it's difficult to have both of those things to be able to do. Principals are coming up. I'm going to say on the educational side, dealing that, not the operational side, the business side, and a lot of them do not have the training in that. And that it's just difficult. It's a different way of doing what you have to do.
Okay.
Okay.
So I understand.
Second question.
So the second question, I think, is maybe even sort of dispositive of the whole idea of having a regionalization committee, and that is the issue of governance that you raised. We've been apportioning costs based on the number of students who attend the regional school district, and it's not exact, but it is about each of the smaller towns in the secondary region, the 7 through 12 region. The smaller towns have about 7% of the students, and then slightly less than 80% of the students come from Amherst. The prospect of having a governance, I mean, you articulated 2 models, neither of which I think would be acceptable to the smaller towns. In other words, for Amherst to vote on who would be members of the Leverett, Shutesbury, and Pelham school committees, I think that's a no-starter. I think it's also a no-starter for there to be proportional voting so that the 5 Amherst members would each cast a 1/5 of the proportion of the votes that would be assigned to Amherst, and then then there'd be representatives from Leverett, Shutesbury, and Pelham who would get to cast each together 7%, so that the outlying 3 towns would have, in essence, 21% of the votes, and would face the prospect of never being able to prevail on a vote that they disagreed with. And I think that if you can't provide right here and now some different models in terms of governance, then I think this process can just stop, because I don't think it'll go anywhere on that basis. If you've got some other models, I'd love to hear it. But I can't imagine that the 3 outlying towns are even going to sit down at the table if the governance model that you articulated is the bottom line.
Well, first of all, I'm not here. It's not my job my job is to say what the different things are, not to defend or whatever. If you have a constitutional requirement, I'm just going to tell you that, on representation. There are 5 or 6 different, I gave you example of where I was as a superintendent and others. They're out there. That's why you form your planning board, and you come up and you take a look at all of those options and take a look at what's going to happen, and then people will know. Now, the end result is, by the way, just so that you know, if you form a 4-town region, each town, it goes to town meeting, they get a vote. Their equivalent votes on that when they vote the assessment at town meetings. On the school committee, the representation on the school committee is a one-person, one vote, and that's a different ballgame. It's not my job, not my models or anything like that. It's the state models that they require, and every town does it a little differently that makes them feel comfortable what they can do and how they can do that. So I'm not here to debate that issue. I'm here just to inform you. Hold on. I'm going to be a teacher here for a moment. Hold on. That the different models there until you. And I think you to say this is a non-starter, we're not going to do this, I think is a very bad thing to say to people. You need to sit down and look at all of the options out there so you're informed, and it's informed decision-making, not just some rumors or whatever, this is what's going to happen. Be informed. Your district planning board can go out and inform people, and then you find out so everybody knows. So if you don't want to do it, you understand clearly why don't you want to do it. And if you want to do it, clearly what's going to happen. It's information. We're an information age, and people need to know what are the true facts and not trying to scare people with everything else. So,
yeah, I think we need to not engage in debate today for a process that is going to go on for some period of time. And I think that the points that have been raised are important points for us to consider as we go through the process. There are many elements that we need to be concerned about, and I'll bring 2 to 4, and I see if you have any comments on them. One is that the current structure of our schools is that we have a regional school for grades 7 to 12, and then we have 2 towns, Amherst and Pelham, within a union. So that the current superintendent actually works for 3 different school committees at the present time. And the observation that has initially been made is that is very draining and very expensive for a superintendent to report to 3 different committees. So that's one issue that needs to be addressed as we examine this process. And the other element that we know of is that we have the experience with the financial question of how we do the division of the assignment of expenses within the 4 towns, because we already have an assessment formula that is not the state default formula, but does exist and has been very comfortably in place, that has to do with the rolling average of students that has been accepted for many years by all 4 towns and by the school committee. So there are some historical pieces in place that a regional planning board would be considering, as well as the issues that this member of the audience has raised.
Mm-hmm. Well, I lost a little bit there what you're going, but that's okay. The answer is that you got to look at all of those things and take a look at, you use your secondary as a model for your, say you're going to do a K-6 district that you wanted to do. But again, you got to look, as I'm saying earlier, you've got to look at all of the aspects of it educationally, what's going to happen, and go through that process. And so everybody will feel comfortable. There are requirements that you have to meet. One is the governance, and one is your assessment process that have to go with. And if you're talking with the statutory method, you can have an alternate method, provided that everybody agrees, the town agrees. That can happen. So I think, I'm not sure exactly where you're trying to head with some of this, but I think that's where, you really need to start your process and sit down, and that's where all your questions and answers are going to come from.
I think that where I was getting at is that financially and educationally, as we get a financial consultant and an educational consultant, that there are financial and educational questions that have to do both with quality of education and the way in which we administer our schools now in the four towns and might administer our schools in the four towns in the future. And this is not an end result, it's an opportunity for exploration.
One of the things that I'm picking up again that you're talking about is that you have the region and then you have 2 elementary school committees, yes. And so your superintendent's doing 3. I'm sure you can have 3 sets of policies to deal with and the different contracts. It becomes very difficult time-wise to spend for a superintendent on that. The other thing that you asked, I'm just remembering one question here, that Freetown Lakeville was a 2-town K6s. In Freetown K6, and then a 7-12, and they just fully regionalized K-12. Because of that, one of the things is the operational piece of it, that they were together, they were better than they were separated. They were lucky that they still had one contract, and some of the other things were easier to do for them. But again, as they realized that the superintendent was having to do 3 meetings, actually 2 in the region, 1 each one, so he's dealing with probably 4 meetings a month. And then 3 different budgets, 3 different sets of policies, so it's a really complicated thing. So, and difficult for him to keep doing that. So that, again, is be a much streamlined operation for your superintendent central office. If they had, say, in this case, you'd have 2 committees, but hopefully what you try to do in that case is they could have similar policies to operate under, instead of all different sets of policies. I'm not sure how what do you have for policies now? Are they all separate? Yeah. And that becomes very difficult to operate under.
Okay.
Could I ask a follow-up on that? And we still have some time, so I won't take away the audience time. You mentioned it's Freetown?
Freetown Lakeville.
Because that's one of the things that's so important to us, because as Mary Lou asked earlier, you can go to the state website and find out who the current regions are, but what that doesn't tell you is who just formed a region, who did it 10 years ago, like you listed off for us. And although this Freetown Lakeville might have some similarities to us, most of these don't have a lot of similarities to us, and so it's harder for us to compare, because it's not like we're 2 completely separate towns that haven't had this experience of already having a shared 7-12, et cetera. So we can learn something from everybody, but we'd obviously rather focus on the ones that are more similar to us. Along those lines, are you familiar with, and again, because this wouldn't be on a list somewhere, anybody who's gone through this process or partway through this process in Massachusetts and then said, you know what, not going to do it?
I've been doing this for 4 years, not recently that I'm aware of. However, one of the interesting things to comment to you is that because we are Massachusetts and everything is different from all parts of the state, you're not going to find anything the same. Right. And all different things locally are driving certain things to happen. In a particular case, 2 towns, as Somerset Berkeley, came together because they wanted a new high school. And that was their reason, School Building Authority. There can be other reasons that different places do it that's effective for them. So again, to say that you can talk to them and find some things out. There might be some similarities, but there's never going to be anyone exactly the same.
Like us, right?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on this, and a question from the audience as well. So in your experience with these other towns, it sounds like all of them did eventually regionalize. What did you find to be the biggest roadblocks?
Well, I should answer. I should start off with you want to know something that didn't fail. I just remember that Air Shirley finally did, but it was Air Shirley and Lunenburg that was starting, and Lunenburg chose not to, and Lunenburg felt they wanted to be on their own, and that was the bottom line to that. So the other 2, Cher and Shirley, realized they needed to join. So again, that's that particular case, and that was that they really wanted to be on their own, and they wanted a new high school of their own. So they chose not to proceed with that. Again, also there was some funding issues too, but they eventually those 2 towns did form a region, and they entered into contracts with the Department School Building Authority for additions and renovations to their buildings. That was a driving force for them. School Building Authority has been a driving force for a lot of different ones. That if they regionalize, they can get extra points, 6 percentage points more on reimbursement. So again, it's all different things. Why would they want to join? Some of it can be what Andy just talked about, was the superintendent and the operation. How much time can they spend with 3 school committees or 4 school committees?
But have you found sort of the sticking points for some of these towns, the things that came up in the process, that sort of hurdles that they had to?
Well, one of them was how was the assessment process going to be, and the other was the governance school committee, and then one of the cases was the preliminary budget, that certain votes had to have in the preliminary, but then the final vote for the school committee certified as a 2/3 no matter what. It has to be the membership. So, but it's the governance issue and the assessment of the major ones that come up.
Thanks.
Okay. I don't know if there are questions on other subjects than the subjects that have been previously covered. I don't want to go back into subjects that we've previously had, but Michael, you think so?
Mike Jakes. One of these might touch a little bit. I think these are all very short answer questions for you. So there are two of them, and one of them is, when the teachers' unions have renegotiated contracts, obviously there are towns where teachers are paid higher and probably lower, even with similar experience and educational backgrounds. In those cases, have you found that there are some places where they still allow some people to be paid less and some more, or does everyone sort of come together under, one umbrella based on experience and education?
They call it leveling up. Where you're going to be paid. The law says the teacher can't be paid any less than they're making, but doesn't mean they have to go to the highest level. And that's all negotiable. And each time it happens, they have to negotiate with the unions what the contract's going to be looking like.
Okay. And the second question was on size of school committees. What is the largest regional school committee in terms of membership that you know of, and what is the average size school committee for?
Well, that it depends. If we're talking a vocational school district,
one like ours. So
you're like yours. They range anywhere from, I've seen them 5 to 10. That range, 5 to 12, somewhere, that number. Vocationals wind up with, some of them have 19, 18 towns, so they got like 20 people. But it depends what each one, again, each one is different where they go and how many they want on it. Usually a number anywhere from 5 to 10 I've seen. They might have a few more. It also depends if people want more representation. What was agreed to at the time, how many people you want on. So there's no average, you can come up with an average, but there's no set rule. That's a local decision.
Okay.
Mary Lou Tileman, are there any other forms of collaboration that would meet the needs? I know you're doing region, but do you know of other school districts that have other structures besides being a region but collaborate?
Well, they can supervisory unions, which you can do. But again, each town, they can do it. I'm not totally aware of them. They use collaboratives, the collaborative organization to work with them. The towns use, they do a lot in the special education aspect of it. But there's nothing that I'm aware of at this point.
Thank you.
But that doesn't mean this doesn't exist. So not that I'm aware of.
Hi again. And I was wondering if you could direct any of us to some studies about how, now that we've been going for quite a while now with MCAS, have there been any studies of school districts that worked independently with MCAS scores, particularly with students who struggle, the subgroups, the various groups, and then whether or not regionalization has had any impact? That's one question. And then
Let me do one question at a time.
Sorry about that.
The answer is not that the recent years, there hasn't been, there's not had a length of time to do that.
Yeah.
That would be a very interesting doctoral study for somebody to do, so we could propose that someplace if they want to do a study. But I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know if there's been any real studies done on that one. So.
Then another study. This one may be more likely, although I would like attribution if someone does pursue this as a doctoral study. Have there been any studies on general trends in economic savings, cost savings?
Yeah, they do take a look at it. Well, I can tell you the one I worked on with Southwood Tall and Granville, we did a prediction, and I got a notification from the superintendent that our prediction was that the town of Granville did save money. So they did. So, again, it also, but there's a lot of other intermediating factors that can happen to do that. In Somerset, Berkeley, I believe they came out where we said they should be coming out on that one. But again, look back at what's the educational value that you're going to get for the children, and if you can stay within the same dollars. Unfortunately, people tend to look at how much are we going to save instead of how much better education we're going to give the kids.
That's why I asked my first
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. If there's one more question on a different subject, we have time for one more.
Exactly. I wonder if, given your experience, are there any legal barriers or state education bureaucracy barriers to school districts that haven't regionalized, but that at the elementary level, but that are regionalized at the high school level, at the secondary school level, engaging in some kind of curriculum coordination. In other words, volunteer where teachers from the elementary schools that feed into a secondary region working on curriculum issues with the elementary schools with the other elementary schools. So you don't have a region, but you have curriculum coordination so that, in fact, when kids get to the 7 through 12, you've had some working together of teachers and perhaps administrators to make sure that they all arrive with the same, they don't get taught separately. They may even have different models of delivery, like one may be a Montessori school, as we have in Springfield, but you have at least the same curriculum content, however it's delivered.
That's what your planning board would find out for you. And so you form a planning board and you get your consultants in, and they can go find and do some of those studies and see what's out there, and then those questions can get answered. But that's why you form the board, so your questions and other questions can be answered. And they act in the public forums. You go out in public forums and say, what are the types of things you want to know? So now we know what types of things we got to find out, and so we can answer those questions and make sure you feel comfortable. So the answer is that's what your board does.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Ms. Brewer.
Okay, to wrap up. So I appreciate all the questions people brought to us, and I scribbled them down, and we will look at them as we continue on in this process, because they are all important, and we do have to figure out which kind of consultant can answer which kind of question and at what point in the process. And for example, I share this deep concern about governance, and I am quite confident that we'll need to look into that, because it seems quite clear that what we do now is not legal, although obviously no one's suing us over it. So it remains to be seen what we would actually be able to do that would make sense for our organization, rather than being put in some little box that doesn't necessarily fit what we do. In the meantime, as Ms. Appy mentioned at the beginning, we are having a meeting tomorrow at 10:30. By the time you see this, you will already have passed, and possibly even the meeting next Wednesday the 30th at 7 p.m., which is when we will probably be joining with the other towns. If anybody has anything they want to share with us, please do write to us. The way you can write to us is by writing to RSDPC, which stands for Regional School District Planning Committee, at amherstma.gov. The web page also has that email address on it. Our web page is at amherstma.gov. We're listed under boards and committees, but you don't even have to go that far. If you can remember amherstma.gov/RSDPC, that will take you straight there. I appreciate people signed in. We expect that this will possibly be available for broadcast, meaning I know most of you will probably just bring it up on your computer whenever you want to, but for those of us who like to still watch it on TV, it might be available in about a week to 10 days. It will probably be shown on Channel 15 in addition to being on demand. I want to thank Amherst Media for having us here again. It was really convenient to do it this way, and parking was okay and everything like that. So again, continue to ask us questions. We haven't had people been writing to the Amherst, the RSDPC address, but we would like to continue to hear from you. Of course, all the meetings are posted. You can continue to follow those on the town website. You can subscribe to that calendar so you can find out when those meetings are. Also, if you sign in with us, we'll try and send you a reminder email when those meetings are taking place. And we hope to draw up, I think, a preliminary timeline of how we think this might work at the meeting on the 30th, just so people have a sense. You know, we talked about the December deadline, the July deadline, the year, the 2 years, It all seems rather long at this point, but that looks that we'll have a better sense of where people can feed in, and we will continue to have public forums as seems appropriate throughout the time period, in addition to entertaining public comment at those meetings. So thanks everybody for watching.
And thank you, Mr. Hemman, again for
Very
joining
glad to
us.
be here. All right, thank you.
Thanks.